PSP. This big black slab of a handheld was brought out by Sony back in 2004 to compete with the DS. You could conceivably bludgeon someone to death with this thing. It looks like it was carved from fucking obsidian. I bet the original design document contained just a low-res JPEG of the monolith from 2001 with the words "fuck Nintendo" scrawled across it in crayon.
Hey man, if I had a gun like that, it would have love potion bullets, and I'd be a lady killer and shoot ladies with my love. But then, so many ladies would fall in love with me, and I had to fight them off with my sword. And they go, "Hi, Dospo, please!" And I'd say, "Hey baby, I'm too busy to steal your heart. I have to steal a car and do a mad flip with it and smash into other cars and go boom boom boom." Wow!
But as far as handheld consoles went, the PSP was undeniably solid. Instead of relying on arguable gimmicks like a touchscreen or a mic, the modus operandi of the PSP was to do the basics and do them well. It had a huge fuck-off screen, great analog sticks and buttons, and it was to my mind far nicer to hold than a DS. Nintendo's handheld did outsell it almost 2-1, but the PSP was by no means a failure, shifting approximately 82 million units, making it the 8th best-selling console of all time. If only I had any desire to play my Vita. What really sold the PSP for me though was the games lineup. Most of the best games were spin-offs of first-party PlayStation titles, things like Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, God of War Chains of Olympus, and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. And then of course, there was Daxter. It could be said that Daxter is the runt of this particular litter, as the series that spawned it, the Jack games, has been ostensibly defunct since 2009. Regardless, this game is the definition of a forgotten gem. Following its release in March 2006, the game was showered in critical praise. Not only that, it was a commercial hit, selling approximately 4.23 million copies, putting it among the all-time best-selling PSP games. It honestly baffles me the extent to which this game has been forgotten, especially considering that some of the aforementioned games like Peace Walker are still being applauded to this day. I never had much interest in playing the main series Jack games, mostly because I took one look at the main character, the eponymous Jack, and thought, that is the most uninspired, neo-fantasy, Ben Stiller looking piece of shit character design I've ever seen. Daxter, on the other hand, was far more interesting to me, both in terms of the character and the game. As was often the case with spin-off titles on handheld devices, King Naughty Dog sat atop his throne of money within Castle PS2, and had the management of the humble fishing town portable gaming delegated to a subordinate. Which is a bullshit way of saying they had the development of Daxter outsourced to Ready at Dawn Studios, known up until that point for literally fucking nothing, and who would go on to make... oh no. Why must everything I love turn to highly cinematic ash? Daxter was Jack's sidekick in the main trilogy and was, as I understand it, the comedic foil to Jack's bland heroic blandness. Kind of like Rocket Raccoon, if Rocket Raccoon wasn't such a complete hack job of a character. I mean, come on, they just sellotaped the raccoon to a big fucking gun and you people ate it up. I think now would be a good time to reveal my new OC Do Not Steal Revolver Ocelot. Merch starts at 50 drachma. I find Daxter's design kind of excellent. He is, as he proudly states, an Otzel, an otter-weasel hybrid with the ability to talk. He's this sleek, slender, furry little guy, not that kind of furry guy, with aviator goggles, crazy eyes, and a shit-eating grin. Not too visually busy without being too simple, which makes additions to his character model as the game progresses stand out nicely. He could have easily been one of PlayStation's mascots had his overrated alcoholic uncle not beaten him to it. Daxter is set between Jack 1 and Jack 2 and explains how Daxter managed to bust Jack out of jail at the beginning of the latter title. I would have given props to Naughty Dog for allowing another studio to provide a fresh outlook on their IP, except I noticed that the one part of the game they didn't outsource was the story and cutscene dialogue. But then again, both aspects are pretty good in a campy tongue-in-cheek kind of way, so I suppose I shouldn't complain. The game opens with this sage guy slapping you in the face with context.
In my many years as a sage, and trust me, it's a big number, I've learned one very important truth.
Yeah, you know what? No, dude, you have a fucking log for a head. You don't seem trustworthy in the slightest. He then goes on to talk shit about my boy Daxter before never being referenced or acknowledged again throughout the entire game.
Behind every great hero, there is always a wisecracking, obnoxious nincompoop.
Truly. What a guy. The game opens for real with this old dude Osmo being rejected by his rent boy when he notices what looks like a meteorite crashing out of the sky. So, like any logical human, he legs it towards the crash site. And yes, these guys are referred to as humans. I guess elf ears will be the next big thing after dabbing and high heel flip-flops die out. He comes across Jack being arrested by guards and spots Daxter darting away. Osmo helps him escape and we see the cogs in his head start to turn. So then 2 years excuse me? Daxter let Jack rot in a cell for 2 years. Osmo didn't act on whatever the fuck this was for 2 fucking years? Anyway, cut to Daxter in a bar talking some big game to the local NPCs who all give him the cold shoulder. At this point, Osmo approaches him, 2 years after seeing him in passing, let's not forget, and offers him a job as an exterminator. Which he takes. Let me ask you something. I show you a box art like this, I tell you the game is a 3D platformer, what do you expect the premise to be? A collectathon? A rescue the princess sort of affair? Nah, fuck that. In this game, Daxter becomes an exterminator and then goes out on extermination jobs. That's it. That's the game. I fucking love it. Even the final boss is a giant bug dude who you would have no knowledge of or reason to cross were it not a direct implication of your line of work. That's like if in Mario you progress by fixing people's plumbing and the final boss was the great and mighty fucking poo. So you rock up to the shop for your first job. Osmo gives you a literal fly swatter and boots you back out the door to go clear out a hotel. This is our first introduction to the game's backdrop, New Haven, which is a kind of cyberpunk fantasy city with just the slightest dystopian air to it. There's on a motherfucking moped. You get a fucking space vest by a little ways into the game that organically expands the overworld by means of some ramps, which I thought was a nice touch. So you rock up to the hotel. The concierge is a pretentious toolbox, but he does direct you towards the rooftop gardens.
So you must be the exterminator. Mr. Crew, our best customer, will be pleased you're here. But I don't like the looks of you.
This area sets the standards for the ones to follow. Bright, cartoony and well themed with a nice colour palette. It took a while for it to click, but the aesthetics have a very World of Warcraft feel to them. The way that everything looks like it was fashioned from lovingly painted pieces of cardboard. Pretty swiftly after entering the stage, you have your first encounter with these metal bugs. Within the bounds of the story, these guys have shown up recently at the behest of Core, leader of the Metalheads and the main antagonist of Jak 2. I quite like these guys as enemies, not only because they're directly involved in the plot, but because they're decently varied among themselves but consistent in terms of visuals and gameplay. There's no one catch-all method of dealing with every bug, so the combat doesn't become overly stale at any point. The melee combat itself is pretty standard arcadey hack and slash wholesomeness. Daxter starts out with one basic combo that more or less persists throughout the game's entire runtime. After he lands 4 consecutive hits, he does a front flip slam attack that can one-shot most standard bugs. If you manage to land a killing blow doing this and then immediately attack again, Daxter will launch into another identical slam. What this means is that if you're anyways tactical, you can chain slams together to quickly dispatch a group of bugs, adding to the overall air of smoothness that the game seems to be shooting for. This combat system is functional, but it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. As you'd probably imagine, you complete missions by killing bugs. Most have a requisite amount of golden gems that you have to collect from defeated metal bugs, like a Celt taking an ear off a fallen enemy as a show of valor. After clearing out the hotel and checking back in with the concierge, you go on your merry way to your next job at a construction site. So you're bumbling around, minding your own business, when all of a sudden...
That ain't no bug!
Tits, suckers, double D's, bags, hookers, just OPs, boobs, melons, jumblies, Jessica's memories.
The owner of these mighty midriff ornaments is Taryn, a sexy kick-ass vigilante type with a whale tail and not a single fuck to give about your shit, man. She helps Daxter out at points throughout the game while he hits on her gormlessly. I quite like Taryn as a side character, especially the fact that her voice actor has this brilliantly controlled uber-British tone.
So take your little toys and go home.
And I've got news for you!
I'd take her over the new Lara Croft any day. At least her character is derived from her words and actions as opposed to repeatedly having the shit kicked out of her. It'd make sense right now to break down Daxter's own character and elaborate on why I find him so fun and enjoyable. I know I compared him to Bubsy in the opening, but he's more like if Bubsy and Joy Wheeler had a forbidden love child who was orphaned and then raised by Sonic. But not that Sonic, or that fucking disaster, but this Sonic. Remember him? Remember Princess Sally? This is the reason you identify as a fucking dog. Daxter's unintimidating appearance might fool you into thinking he's as one-dimensional as other such marketable characters, but you'd be wrong. See, Link fights to save Hyrule. Daxter fights because it falls under the terms of his employment. Dante's a stereotypical fearless badass. Daxter's a little bitch with a big ego. Kirby likes wholesome friendship. Daxter likes looking at naked women.
Whoa! Sorry, ladies! I didn't know Crimson girls took showers.
Crash has an objective. Daxter has a brain. Shadow is angsty. Daxter is edgy. Fuck, Daxter is what Shadow wishes he was. Daxter is what Shadow jerks off to from within his Edgar Allan Poe emo cave as he cries himself to fucking sleep. Going back to Taryn, she takes a fondness to Daxter and gives him a piece of equipment, a bug spray gun. To begin with, it just functions as a stun, but Taryn gives you additional upgrades for it each time you meet her. As you're about to start your third job in a brewery, she gives you a pressure boost attachment that allows you to hover for the duration of a quarter of the tank's gas.
Try it out. Oh, this should be amusing.
This turns out to be a central component of the game, built into the majority of the platforming. The way the spray gun is implemented is pretty slick from my point of view. The fact that the same reservoir is drained whether it's used in combat or for platforming means that gas refills are constantly in demand and never lose value, while the relatively small tank size means that neither aspects of the game are overly simplified. There's some concept art of Daxter with a big machine gun. I can just imagine how fucking tone deaf the game would have been if he'd gone around filling bugs full of lead like some arachnophobic Rambo. The limited spray gun hover is a fairly unique take on platforming. You can stay afloat for about 3 seconds, but the thing that makes it interesting is that it's not a cut and dry 3 seconds. If you manage to collect one of these gas globules while in flight, the timer resets. Even if you run out and start plummeting, if you manage to grab some of this fucking lava lamp fluid before you die, you can halt your fall and continue on your way in a sort of semi-sustained flight. What this creates is a dynamic in which you find yourself making calculated leaps of faith. A great example of this is in this harbour area of the city. There's a massive loop of globules above the open water with collectibles between them there for the taking, if you can manage to stay airborne. The hitboxes are fair and the game is lenient without being broken. For example, if you grind Daxter's face against a platform an inch below the ledge, you'll be able to grab onto it once his hover runs out. Common sense things like that. This style of platforming is surprisingly tense and legitimately quite good fun. The next few stages of the game are, I would say, the most interesting mechanically. Daxter has to use his bug spray to stun stronger enemies, set it ablaze to burn through cobwebs, and hover over flames for a lateral boost. At the end of the brewery stage, there's a DDR minigame out of left field that I found fucking impossible as a kid, but kinda zen now once you get into that sweet rhythm. This minigame is indicative of a few of the following stages that end in a similar manner. I wouldn't have any problem if these had been left out of the final cut, to be honest, but I don't mind them considering they're kept short, simple, and punchy. The next job after the brewery is in a train station, notable for a platforming segment on top of moving trains, which one assumes was the inspiration for the hard-on that Uncharted 2 had for locomotives. It ends with the first boss fight against this massive beetle queen. This is one of those classic arena bosses that tests all the gameplay skills you've been learning up to that point. After beating a few waves of mobs and smacking that fine ass a few times, the fight begins proper. For the first phase, you have to hover over her head while dodging attacks to stun her and then hit the abdomen. The second phase involves avoiding jump attacks and hovering to avoid shockwaves to the same end as before until Queenie is defeated. In the midst of all this, it's revealed that this phallic grey dude called Caden is trying to get Osmo to shut his shop down. There's no immediate reason given as to why he gives a crap about the business, and the one he cites for them shutting down is that they're not dealing with the metal bugs effectively enough. That's the same sterling logic as binning your lawnmower because your grass keeps growing. As it turns out, this guy is actually the metal bug leader and Core's right hand man, acting as the game's main antagonist, seeing as Core himself never bothers his ass to show up, the lazy mandible-faced twat. The game starts to pick up pace from here. Next up is a strip mine in which you have to retrieve 8 crystals for this questionable miner.
There are a bunch of eco crystals out there. Bring them back if you dare.
It's nicely open-ended. I'd probably call it the best level in the game. Upon returning to the shop, you begin your first vehicular interlude, a short mission in which Daxter rides around on a zoomer. You first have to spray some plants in this picturesque valley, then some moving bugs, and finally you defeat some queens through the holy might of road rage. As with the DDR minigames, the game probably wouldn't have been much worse without these interludes, but I'd argue it's more robust and fleshed out for their presence. Directly after this is a short Vespa chase sequence when Daxter spots Jack in a prison transport. He goes on to find himself surrounded by guards, but is saved by Simon, Osmo's son, who is
Radical dude! Totally extreme!
He takes you to the next stage, a fairly linear oil tanker. This level isn't too much to talk about, it basically just serves as a segue into some character development, with bounce pads. Daxter finds a friendly bug who he names Tick and takes on as his own sidekick.
I'll get us off this rusty boat. Don't worry, a little, thorax, or whatever it is. You know?
Oh, I see what you're doing there, some shoe on the other foot shit. Careful now, if you force that character arc anymore it might break. He then meets Taran again, who gives him a flamethrower attachment for the spray gun, and therein lies probably my biggest gripe with this game. You see, up until this point you'll be using your spray gun in combat to stun enemies, particularly big and awkward ones, so that you can get in close to melee them. Daxter only has 5 points of health to start off with, so missing your stun or overestimating how long it'll last can result in a substantial chunk being knocked off. With the addition of the flamethrower, you can just blunder your hollow skull into the centre of a gang of mobs, spin around drunkenly with the trigger pulled, and sit back as they all roast. Almost nothing can survive more than a second of sustained fire, so all combat challenges are removed, leaving the platforming to prop up the gameplay for the remainder of the runtime. To analogize, the Romans would have never bothered sending out legions of highly trained soldiers to fight the Byzantines if they could have just fucking napalm bombed them. From here, 2 stages open up around the harbour. There's a distillery that's cool but not particularly memorable, and a fish cannery in which you find this fucking mutated Teletubby who apparently owns the place. I know I said the strip mine was probably the best level in the game, but this one would be a strong contender, definitely the best looking. I mean, just look at that. I can feel that. Also, there's these goddamn piranha pricks that make my blood boil. I will, however, concede that this stage makes good use of the flamethrower to move and melt blocks of ice. After this, you start another thread of vehicular interludes. This time you and Simon defeat these tapeworm queens by means of chucking bombs and later a turret segment in this lake area.
Oh yeah, dude! That was supremo radical!
For what it's worth, these interludes are quite well laid out and enjoyable to navigate, though I think they could have benefited from a faster pace all round. The game starts to stagnate slightly at this point. Some of the previous levels, specifically the tanker, the construction site and the strip mine, are recycled. I'd imagine to cut development costs and make additional use of assets. These levels are still pretty well designed and they do throw things in to differentiate them. For me personally though, I'd always choose fewer unique stages over more repetitive ones. In the second strip mine stage, you have to go around clearing out bug hives in order to draw out a queen, a wasp this time. The level opens with Taran giving you the final spray gun upgrade, and by far the worst one. It's this electromagnetic grenade launcher that adds absolutely nothing to the platform and is worse in combat than the flamethrower. It has 2 discernible uses. 1, breaking walls in this particular stage, and 2, a necessary attack against 2 bosses, otherwise it might as well be a TF2 hat. Like, I can suspend my disbelief and say that if you add pilot light to the end of a spray gun you get a flamethrower. But don't try to tell me you can turn this into this by means of a fucking glow stick.
If we don't stop this metal bug infestation, there won't be any people left.
No problem. Then it'd just be you and me, baby. Starting civilization all over again. That ain't no bug!
The Wasp Queen boss fight starts pretty similar to the last one, down to the smacking of the veritable ass. She gets a little catty and shows off the goods. Queen Bee knows you're looking, she don't care. You stun her with a grenade when she lands and get in close for a few free hits. In her final phase, she lands on the arena walls and starts firing projectiles. This is when you break out the grenade launcher to knock her back down and finish her off. Next, there's a lumber mill stage that's apparently run by the High King of Ireland.
Alright, well, you came to the right place. There are huge bugs dropping disgusting eggs all over.
The gimmick of this one means that you have to fry 7 big flying bugs with bug lanterns. I quite like this one. This leads into the second tanker stage, which takes place more within the bowels of the ship. As he escapes in a ball of fire, Daxter smashes us over the head with a plot point.
You see this? That tanker's cargo was meant to be delivered to the Baron's palace. You know what that means?
Yeah, that was approximately my response as well. So you piss off to the Baron's palace on a whim. The dynamic duo blag their way in about as smoothly as a sheet of sandpaper take to the boot of an angry Russian man currently kicking you in the face.
Who called you?
Your boy, you know, Captain Zyman, Rupert Tickjackmus.
Nice try. That call didn't happen. Captain Rupert Tickjackmus is on leave this month. He couldn't have been the one.
Well, you see...
The captain, called, like, from his vacation house, home, hotel, and said this palatial palace type place was crawling with bugs.
Oh god, this is giving me a fucking aneurysm. Eventually, Lance Corporal Ponce here is convinced and you head inside.
Have a good day!
I never do.
That's pretty funny. Inside you traverse some gardens and a library with the most trash tier faulty McDonald's toy laser security system you've ever seen. After this you get some insight into the scheming going on before Tick helps you steal a map and you gun it out of there. With your recon mission complete, you return to the shop to find Caden hassling Osmo again. Shit gets real when Caden squishes Tick in front of Daxter. Oh no, oh dear, oh gosh no. I had so much investment in that little black dot with the yellow outline. Daxter charges out after Caden, only for him to detonate a bomb he had planted, destroying the shop.
Osmo!
Jesus, what's this game rated again? 7+? We brought them up the hard way back in 2006. With the salty taste of revenge in their mouths, Daxter and Simon hightail it over to the prison where Jack is being kept. And unfortunately, the final stage, is easily the worst in the game. It introduces Crimson Guards as a new enemy type, who can kill you instantly on sight from outside your FOV. What this leads to is lazy and annoying forced stealth segments in a game with no stealth mechanics whatsoever. On top of this, half the stage is made up of 2.5D side-scrolling sequences with a fixed camera that are just so very tedious. There's one bit of hover platforming jammed in like a granite dildo towards the end of the stage, but it's far too overlong and samey, not the flashy final test of platforming skills I would have liked to see. And then there's the final boss fight. This is, without question, one of the worst boss fights I have ever played. So you come across Caden, him apparently liking to hang out in random corridors, who reveals his true form as the Metal Bug leader. Now maybe I'm biased, but to me, this looks cool, but this is over-designed to high hell. Anyway, the fight itself is a fucking train wreck. The first phase has you hovering between platforms over an electrified pit, avoiding attacks until the Crimson Chin decides to give you a free hit with a grenade launcher. The camera is locked on Caden, which cripples your ability to locate the gas globules you need to stay mobile. After this, the floor collapses, dropping you both into a pit. You have to avoid projectiles to get to either side of a long platform, at which point you can hover across to a valve that can be opened with the flamethrower. This part is fine mechanically, but just royally uninspired. Finally, you drop onto another platform with 3 lanes, at the end of which Caden will jump between these big canisters. He'll occasionally pause to charge up a Kamehameha, at which point you hit him with the grenade launcher. This explodes that particular canister, freezing time briefly for whatever reason, and creating a short platforming segment that you have to complete to land a hit. 2 of these are as easy as your mum, one of them has to be done fucking perfectly. Nail them all and it's job done. Caden grumbles some generic final boss horseshit, Zyman quips, and the game is over. The final scene is back at the bar. There's like a half second of fan service with a bunch of main series characters. Daxter gets pats from the bar wench and the fuck me eyes from Taran, going out like the feisty little shit he is. The game does have some replay value. You can collect precursor orbs around the stages to knock DDR dream sequences back to the shop, as well as some other secrets like an E3 2005 trailer and some concept art. Apparently there were stealth mechanics. I guess E3 trailers were just as bullshit 15 years ago as they are now. The dream sequences are all based on popular action movies like The Matrix, Lord of the Rings and Indiana Jones. Beating them unlocks some new melee moves you'll probably never use and some health buffs. There's also a bug combat game that you access at the main menu that you can play by finding bug cages and items hidden in different stages. However, it turns out to be just a glorified rock paper scissors. Please don't waste any of your short finite life on this. Now, my final word on Daxter. For me, this game was a textbook example of a 3D action platformer. I had to try pretty hard to not overuse certain keywords like varied and thematic while I was writing this script, but between them they do summarise the game quite well. The platforming is satisfying and the combat is serviceable, if at times held back by some awkward additions to your arsenal. The gameplay is switched up often enough to keep it fresh, even if some of the interludes do feel a bit underworked. The story is pretty hollow, but its only real job is to provide a vehicle for a host of fairly engaging characters and the overarching tone of subtle parody that envelops proceedings. The game has a defined aesthetic that I think is realised well, and each different area is sufficiently unique from any other so it never becomes a grind. The boss fights range from enjoyably competent to complete dumpster fire, and the game does go out on a fairly weak note with that final stage, but I would say that the good elements of the game dramatically outweigh the bad. I mean, I don't think anyone would complain if we had more characters in the vein of Daxter, with that slight punk rock edge to them. Like, imagine if Fox McCloud smoked Cubans, or if Ganon was constantly surrounded by a shitload of groupies, or if Luigi murdered Daisy and then overdosed on narcotics.
Now that is a heroic exit.
Hello, you charming fiends. I'm whispering right now because it is 12:30 and everyone in my house is asleep, so bear with me. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, subscribe if you want to see more. You can check out my other video I did before on Bionicle Heroes, which was a doozy to say the least. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, feel free. I don't post much at the moment, but I suppose if people are there to listen, I will start to. And if you're fucking mentally insane, you can donate to my Patreon, I guess. But yeah, thanks for sticking through to the end, and I will see you next time.